Welcome everybody. Thanks for attending our conversation on cybersecurity. Today you'll learn about cybersecurity in the perspective of what happens in terms of the police force, insurance, and in IT itself. We'll have our panelists. So we'll have Andre, Sean, Michael, and Dario. They'll have a little discussion about what's going on in the cybersecurity world. And please feel free to send any messages my way. And then come the end, we'll have a short Q&A. So I'm going to pass it on to Andre. Are you ready, Andre?
I'm ready.
Perfect.
Thanks, Katie.
No problem.
Okay, so I'm Andre Vittorio. I'm the president of Ideological Systems here in Markham, Ontario. And we thought we'd put this webinar together today, not to kill you by PowerPoint. I think everybody's seen enough of that over the last couple of years here working on Zoom. I thought we'd put together a panelist of experts and just have a discussion, and hopefully all of you attendees can be part of the discussion to send your questions as you think of them to Catherine, and she'll make sure it gets injected into the conversation. The people that we selected here are very important partners in your battle against cybersecurity and cybercrime. So I'm going to introduce our folks here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, actually. I'm just going to, because I don't want to steal their thunder. So Sean, why don't you tell us who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. My name is Sean Marshall. I'm a detective with Toronto Police. I'm in charge of the investigative section of the Coordinated Cyber Center, which means that I'm in charge of the team that helps investigate more complicated cybercrime in Toronto, anything that's beyond the resources at the divisional level. So when it comes to things like malware, ransomware, insider threats, SIM swapping, complex investigations, those fall to my team.
All right. Thanks, Sean. And Dario and Michael, tell us about yourselves.
Sure, I'll go first. Dario Batista. I'm president, CEO of, and the founder, I guess, of iSure Insurance. We're an insurance brokerage here in the GTA, serving customers across Canada. We have a particular expertise in the cyber world, very happy to be part of this discussion. Michael, I'll let you introduce your role at iSure and yourself.
Thanks, Dario. Michael McQuaid. I've been in the insurance business for about 36 years. I'm Vice President Corporate Risk at iSure. I've been following insurance developments and trends since Y2K, and the whole idea of the insurance industry wrapping around the whole concept of data as an intangible asset and a potential liability. So I'm very excited to be part of this conversation and bringing everybody up to speed on the insurance industry side of cyber.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And for those of you who don't know me, so I'm Andre Vittorio. I'm the president of Ideological Systems. We've been in business now for 26 years. We specialize in small, medium business IT with a focus on cybersecurity for that end of the market. So let's get the conversation started then. So let's talk about the changing trends each of you guys have seen in your professional capacity over the last couple of years when it comes to cybersecurity. Who wants to go first with that? You want to start, Sean?
Sure. I guess the biggest threat, I think, facing small, medium business right now, obviously, is malware, because that is something that is just running rampant all across the world. But it's really changed over the last few years because, as many of you might remember, when malware first started, it was targeting individuals. It was targeting people. It was locking up your personal computer and stopping you from looking at the photos of your grandchildren, for instance, and demanding like $300 in payments in order to unlock it. And then from there, it sort of morphed into the business world because they can typically afford to pay more, or hopefully they can afford to pay more. And then it morphed again into actual data exfiltration. So now they're getting into your network, they're stealing your data, they're threatening to leak it, as well as encrypting your system, giving that extra leverage to try and extort some more money out of you. And now it's expanding yet again, and you've got ransomware as a service. So a lot of the people that are doing ransomware incidents right now may not even be that technically proficient. They're just basically using the equivalent of some software that they bought out of the box and installed, and it runs everything for them, with the person that developed the ransomware getting a bit of a cut. So they just are now like a ransomware operator as opposed to an inventor or an innovator of it. So that's been, I think, one of the biggest changes over the last, say, 6 years or so, is how ransomware has changed, but also scaled up, and now the threat that it poses to just about everybody, because now your data, your privacy is also at risk.
Okay. So, and we've worked together on a few situations where this is actually happening in real life. It's not theoretical. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that a little bit later on. And Dario and Michael, is there anything that changed in your end? I'm sure quite a bit from the insurance side of things. Maybe discuss a little bit for some of our attendees here about how and when you guys would get involved in a cybersecurity incident.
So yeah, we're finding, I mean, the landscape has changed and is changing rapidly. And there is more of a recognition of where cyber insurance fits into the play. I'll be honest, I mean, 7-8 years ago, it was a difficult discussion because most people would answer, I'm not a tech company. And the reality is cyber touches every company out there. Unless you're still with paper files and you have no computer whatsoever, which I don't think there are too many businesses operating like that, cyber is a part of your business. And the analogy that we like to use when we explain it to people is if you think about a retail store, if you owned a retail store 20 years ago, you would not think to operate that retail store without a padlock and without an alarm system and perhaps bars on windows. But there was a realization that, you know, you would still buy insurance even though you had all of these, because the reality is if someone wants to get in, they will get in if they really, really want to get in. And where insurance picks up, where the cybersecurity drops off is those situations. And so the insurance is really designed to fill in those gaps, just like you know, the retail store that would have someone break in, and a more sophisticated thief would be able to circumvent a lot of types of security. You know, the security gets rid of a whole bunch of it, but there's always that percentage that can get through, and that's where we step in at that point. Mike, do you want to speak a little bit about the trends in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace at a high level?
Yeah, well, it picks right up on Sean's comment about the trend about ransomware. Most of the losses now being reported on cyber insurance revolves around ransomware, to the point where the underwriting never charged enough premium to contemplate the risk because the cyber coverages have been relatively new. But now with the accelerated losses with respect to ransomware, now the markets are offering the coverage at a restricted or sub-limited basis because it's just taking off. It's just taking off. In fact, where I even believe the bad actors, if they do get into your system, find out whether you carry the coverage. And then if they see a limit there, gosh, I know where to peg the ransom amount at, right? So it's been very intrusive and very, very active. Very bad in social engineering fraud, which I think a lot of people pick up on relatively easy, but the ransomware is certainly the most prevalent loss experience in the insurance marketplace today.
So from an IT perspective, a lot of companies are still behind the curve a little bit in protecting their businesses. Everybody understands locks on doors and alarms and things like that, but they don't really understand the cyber locks that are required on their business, so to speak. And they're very open to attack in a lot of different ways. So imagine you have this amazing house all dressed up nice and you have no doors and windows on it. Would you even contemplate that? No. But a lot of people's businesses, that's how they operate on a day-by-day basis, and they have no idea who is transversing inside their company at any given time. So, you know, to mitigate a lot of threat, there's discussion that has to happen about locking your business down. And while you can't prevent all cybercrime, you can prevent a lot of it. And the ones that you cannot prevent, that's when insurance kicks in to help you out from the rest of it. Are you guys seeing any issues in insurance-wise now where insurance companies are demanding sort of action be taken by a company before they'll qualify for insurance? You want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes, Andre. The underwriting has become more intense and more focused on loss control measures and protocols that are taken, particularly around multi-factor authentication. That's become a big red flag if the insured does not carry or have that type of protection in place, because that seems to be the, correct me if I'm wrong, the most easy entry point for the bad actors to get in that way. Mm-hmm. So the underwriting is very intense where they weren't before. They are now. And even if you, an insured was not a high risk, meaning they weren't housing healthcare information, but perhaps more typical innocuous information, they still need to have it. So it's making the insureds raise the bar on their loss control procedures to get the coverage.
Gotcha. Yeah, it is very important. You know, if you don't take anything else away from this webinar, but you should be getting two-factor authentication and protected DNS in place in your organization. I think those two go a long way. What do you think, Sean? Is that you're on mute? You're the guy that's going to be told you're on mute.
That's good. I joked about that earlier too. I think the multi-factor authentication certainly is an important part of any response. We are seeing some SIM swapping that's happening in Toronto, where bad actors are taking over a person's cell phone just with the sheer goal of getting around multi-factor authentication.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about that for some of the folks on here who may not be familiar with what that means or what that looks like.
Sure. So if you are holding your handy little phone in your hand, and you have your telephone number that's associated to that, a bad guy calls up pretending to be you and would tell your cell phone carrier, like Bell or Rogers or TELUS, oh no, I just dropped my phone and it stopped working. Can you please port my telephone number to this new device I have in my hand? And they'll ask some security questions, but it's social engineering. These guys can try and get around that. If you have open social media accounts, they might be able to look around and try and gather intelligence they can use to guess at your passwords. They may be familiar enough with the process, having formerly worked at Bell or TELUS or something, to be able to sort of circumvent the security processes in place. They can port your cell phone number to the device they hold in their hand. And then that's how a lot of places rely on multi-factor authentication. So if you want to log into your online banking, we're going to text a code to your phone. No problem, because now the bad guy's basically holding onto your phone. Having said that, it's not very common. The instances that we're seeing are specifically targeted towards people that hold large amounts of cryptocurrency, because that is what these guys are after, given the nature of cryptocurrency and how those transactions cannot be reversed. It's a very lucrative target for them. So for your average business, having multi-factor authentication, I think, is really essential, because when you leave your car unattended, you lock your doors. You do everything you can to protect your own security of your things, whether it's your car or your house, and it makes sense to lock up your passwords as well.
So do you guys have any examples of some businesses that have been breached, have been hacked, and what the experience was like for those companies from a law enforcement perspective and then from an insurance perspective, like how that sort of played out? I don't know who wants to go.
So unfortunately, there's a number of examples of where it's happened in Toronto. I can only speak inside of Toronto. I am sort of bound by that geographic area, but I am well connected with other cyber investigators in Ontario. So, we know of businesses being hit. And when I say businesses, that's everything from an orthodontist office that has 2 employees to large-scale supermarkets to Life Labs, which I think we all read about a couple of years ago as well, right? When it comes to the experience of all of them, it is relatively similar. From a police perspective, I understand that a business, their priority is the business. It's not for them to gather information for me and to speed my investigation along very quickly. They need to get back up and running. They need their business continuity. But then when they have their feet back under them, I like to reach out and try and gather information from them. We send off a ransomware questionnaire that asks for some technical details. And Andre, I guess this is probably how we met previously, was you were able to answer a lot of those technical details for me, which furthers these investigations. These investigations are all small jigsaw puzzle pieces in a much larger puzzle. So no one holds all of the keys. Instead, I gather information from every specific incident. I share it with law enforcement around the world. Anonymously, I'm not labeling your business. I'm not saying that you were a victim of anything. I'm sharing technical details about the attack in the hopes that we can find people that are responsible. But that's all done after the incident response is in place, after you guys have your feedback under you and you're able to conduct business as usual. That's when we like to try and get some data from you so we can find the people responsible.
How about you folks there in the insurance world? What's your experience been like?
I can share one that hit a little close to home as a colleague brokerage, a friendly brokerage, a broker that fairly, quite technologically advanced, and they had their backups encrypted, I guess, and didn't have access to their backups. But these backups went back a few months, and they were in a position where they were effectively out of their system for the better part of a month. The negotiations that get involved in doing what that needs to be done and that timeline. I believe they ended up paying, or their insurer ended up paying $150,000 plus the business interruption piece of loss. There's a whole side of the loss, but the actual ransom was about 120, I think, or 150. I don't remember the exact number, but it was in that range. But the entire ordeal was tough on the business. Now, they did have insurance, and they were able to claim on that policy, and not just claim the actual ransom piece, but also the damage to the business from a business continuity perspective. But regardless, it is disruptive, and that's one that is a good friend of mine, and not someone I would have expected it would happen to be quite honest with you. So that one hit a little close to home, and that was just last year.
Gotcha.
It happened to them. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, anything you want to add to that, or is that?
Well, I just want to underscore what Dario was saying, and I think what Sean was mentioning too, is that a cyber event is layered. The loss is layered. That follows it. When I mean layered, anytime the system's compromised, you could have a first-party loss, namely your data compromised, your system held at ransom. Or you could have ensuing liabilities to third parties because their information has been compromised. Your business is disrupted. You incur extra expenses over and above your normal overhead to have forensic accounting go into, not forensic accounting, forensics to go in to see how my system was compromised. You could have public relations issues. You could have notification requirements under PIPEDA. Every cyber event has ensuing losses that are layered. It's not just the one compromise of the system that's the event. It just creeps in and grows out from there. So its impact on an organization can be significant.
Okay. So in all these organizations, what precautions did they take? Looking back on it now, hindsight's always 20/20. But what didn't they do that got them into this spot? If you guys even know that, is there anything that you guys want to that sticks out for you? Maybe more for Sean than you would know for Dario and Michael.
I think that I mentioned earlier before we got started that failing to plan is planning to fail. So the businesses that have adapted and overcome both the quickest and, from an outsider's perspective, at least the easiest, are the ones that had a very good plan in place already. So they already have their incident response plan, that they have determined what they're going to do, how they're going to respond to these things. They can put organizations and businesses on retainer so that they have resources at their disposal should something happen. And then they actually practice that as well. So if you have a small business and you are backing up your data frequently, do you test those backups, or do you just rely that they're probably going to work? You actually need to test every part of your incident response plan if you're going to have any sort of confidence in it. I like to hope that having a good response plan would include the police response as well, because that's one missing piece for a lot of organizations. Is all of these things happen, and for some of them, when the information is published on the web, usually it's published on the dark web, I get notified about it. I reach out to the business, and when I talk to them, a lot of them will say, "We never even thought about calling the police." So I'm here to tell businesses, absolutely call the police, because that's the only way that we can really have any impact on this in the long run. Otherwise, the people that are doing this are just acting with impunity. So if you are a business, you need to be patching as frequently as you can and have a good plan in place.
The other thing with cybersecurity, I think that people don't think about is that it's an evolving threat. So what we talk about today may not even exist a year or two from now, just like what we talked about a year or two ago. Nowadays, it's a totally different landscape out there. So, a couple of incidents that we've had as ideological is where the typical ransomware attack was encrypt all your files, put a phone number up for you to call, and then start negotiating to get a decryption key to decrypt your files so you can get back to work again. And the countermeasure to that was an image-based backup, which a lot of companies now have put in place. So the criminals got a little bit smarter, and this time they're going to vacuum out all your personal information as much as they can, put it up on a website somewhere, then encrypt your files, then call you, and now they got you at that point, because the horse has left the barn at this point, where the information is out there. So I don't know, Sean, we've worked together on a couple of those. Do you want to? I don't think it's sort of the attendees may know what really goes on behind the scenes there. If you want to talk a little bit about that kind of attack.
Sure. I guess some of the experience that I can relate is frequently, like you say, the information is exfiltrated. So they will go through, and depending on the organization, the criminal organization, they will actually go through carefully all of your files. They will look at your insurance coverage to see what you are covered for, just like our Dario and Michael said. Armed with that information, they know how much to ask for ransom. They'll exfiltrate as much data as they can because they only want to embarrass you with it. They want to leverage that information as a way to make you pay up by putting usually a directory up on the dark web and say, we have 2 terabytes of data, of customer details and all of this other stuff, and we'll release it unless people pay up. When the police become aware of that information being published to the dark web, I usually get a notification saying, please reach out to this business to see if they've been affected by ransomware. If they know that they have, every time that I call them, they're never really surprised because their computers are typically locked up. And then once they have their feet back under them, I gather technical information about the incident. And then I will forward that to our international partners at Interpol and Europol. Europol is a police organization that links police agencies all across Europe. They really lead the charge when it comes to ransomware investigations. I encourage people to look up their response to those incidents on the Europol website, as well as the website nomoreransom.org, which is another project of theirs. And then with all of these little puzzle pieces that we get from all of the affected businesses, we can try and narrow down who is responsible and hopefully bring them to justice.
So there is some good news sometimes, but just by bringing law enforcement in. So if you guys have heard about the Kaseya ransomware attack that happened in the U.S., was all over the news, and about a month later, they were able to catch these criminals and get the keys to decrypt all the files, because there was a lot of businesses that were basically rendered out of business because there was no way to decrypt their data, but they were able to get it back. So, and I think that is law enforcement working together across the world to try to find where these people are. So
absolutely, the website nomoreransom.org has decryption keys available for a number of varieties of ransomware, and most of those have come about as a result of successful investigations.
So when you guys are building your security response plan or your incident response plan, I think informing law enforcement needs to be part of that. And I think there's some reticence. I think a lot of companies don't want to make their attack public. So I don't know if you have any advice for those folks, Sean?
I can tell you that I don't show up in uniform in the bright, shiny white police car. For the most part, I take all of the information that I need either through the phone, usually because email isn't working at the time. I never publish information about victims of ransomware. I don't do a press release saying that this business was affected or anything like that. Because I never want to tip my hand for my investigations as well. So if you think about it, these guys will keep doing it unless they're caught, because it is very financially lucrative for them. There's no real motivation for them to stop unless it is that they are caught. So that's why law enforcement is dedicating a lot of resources worldwide to finding the people responsible and bring them to justice. Otherwise, this is going to keep continuing, and it's only going to get worse.
So back to the insurance component of things, because we speak to a lot of clients, and the instant answer I get is, oh, we have insurance. But I think, I'm going to let the insurance folks talk more about this, but a building insurance is a little bit different than cybersecurity insurance. So, and that seems to be a lot of people just think as long as they have insurance, it's everything. So, Dario, Michael, you want to talk a little bit about that? I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah, no, we do, and I think as a starting point, and then I'll pass it on to Mike to actually get into the actual layering of coverages and the types of conversations you should be having with your insurance provider and your broker. If you think about it, we use that analogy of locking a store. The reality is when you look at a business, that business can be, typically it's the staff. That is your single biggest, it's human error. It's someone clicking on an email. It's something happening, right? So when you think about it, it's not just the cybersecurity, it's the exposure is throughout the entire organization. It's much more, it's much deeper in the organization than just having padlocks. We use that analogy just to sort of set the conversation to get people thinking, but it's much more than that. And so you can't just take the traditional, I've got building insurance and here we go, it's an all risk policy and away you go and everything is well and good. There are many more layers on things that you need to think about because your business is a lot more complex than just us insuring a building. And Mike, do you want to get into a little bit sort of, talking about the typical answer that we hear? Well, I have an endorsement. They put a cyber endorsement on the policy and we kind of shudder at when we hear that is your cyber policy for most businesses.
Yeah, I would never mix the real property with intangible property when it comes to insurance. You should really have a dedicated cyber policy so there's no confusion and there's distinct coverage available. Cyber insurance is such a broad category that's not really, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So having an endorsement on any type of your typical bricks and mortar policies to offer you a sublimit of privacy coverage could give you the illusion that you're carrying a robust cyber policy. And when you think it's going to perform the way it's supposed to, there's a major letdown in expectation when you find out that the coverage does not perform anywhere near what you thought it would be. So it's a conversation of moving our clients into the direction of purchasing a standalone policy that would have more insuring agreements to deal with what I mentioned earlier about all those layers of loss and cost that follow a cyber event. It's very important that you attract that type of coverage. So don't confuse and take on your broker to say, like, what do you mean? What do I have? What I do not have? Because typically the right conversation would steer you into securing a dedicated policy to give you the coverage to meet your expectations in event of a cyber loss.
All right. So why don't we talk a little bit about the steps that a company should go through and what they should be expecting in the event that there is an attack on their network. Because I think that in order for forensics to do their job, there has to sort of be a freeze, keeping the crime scene intact. I think, Sean, you want to talk a little bit about that? Or
in a perfect world, yes. Mm-hmm. In the real world that we live in, no. I believe that a business's priority should be business. Okay. If you are manufacturing widgets, you need to get things back up and running as quickly as possible because time literally is money. If I wanted to gather as much evidence as I could, then I would absolutely freeze the business, image all the servers. I've never done that, and I never would because it would take a very long time, and I don't want to shut anyone down for that long. I usually rely on the IT services provider for the business to gather the information that I need, which is usually not very complicated. Like I'm not asking, you've seen the ransomware questionnaire that we have. It's not asking incredibly difficult questions. It's asking what sort of operating system do you use? Do you use remote desktop tools and things like that? It's nothing incredibly tech savvy. If people hire an outside IT company to do like an actual ransomware response where they will do like a forensic analysis of the network. They'll figure out how they got in, they'll shut things down. We'll usually work with that managed IT company to gather more detailed evidence that we might be able to use to further the investigation. But business is the most important thing. Business continuity is number one. I'm not here to interrupt people's lives to further my investigations any more than I absolutely have to.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that, actually, that the forensic analysis, now that you brought that up. So Dario, Michael, part of the coverage is to pay for a forensic IT specialist to come in and take a look to see what has happened, what type of damage has been done. I think a lot of people don't know that that's usually included in most of the policies. Is that the case?
It's a common coverage in the more robust policies, if I can use that. It's not common to all policies, but it's something that you should really be looking at, definitely, because that's guaranteed your costs right out of the gate when you say, how did this happen? How did this happen? As a post-loss response to mitigate the loss in play and on the go forward. So it's a coverage that on a proper policy, it's there, and again, it's one of the first things, one of the first uptakes and cover post-loss for sure.
One other area of cybercrime that we haven't talked about that may not affect everybody here on the call, possibly, we don't know who's here on the call, but there's another aspect where there's intellectual property theft, where they didn't necessarily come in and blow up your network or hold you for ransom. But if you are in a business where you have very sensitive information, blueprints, drawings, some type of technology of some sort, we've seen this in the past too, where there's just theft of that information, that intellectual property. So that's a crime as well that needs to be reported, and you need to be aware of that. So I just want to put that out there as another piece. We focus a lot on ransomware. That's the most common, but there's other forms of criminality that's going on right now in the world. There's a big push to steal intellectual property from, and it's not always the big companies, because smaller companies are part of the supply chain. So you may be constructing or building a component for an aircraft that's very, very small and possibly insignificant, but you may have access to larger amounts of data or larger amounts of blueprints, etc., and then you become a target as well for theft. So why don't we open up the floor here to some questions from our attendees? This is sort of your chance to ask anything. I think there's like an Instagram thing like that or something. Ask us anything. For you younger folks out there. So there's one question here about the real push for passwordless access to systems, especially by Microsoft. Put simply, MFA and authentication can be bypassed. How important is location awareness and adaptive MFA in today's world? So I don't know if you want to answer a little bit about that, Sean, or I can answer a little bit about that. It's up to you.
Sure. Well, I believe that adaptive MFA, for people that aren't familiar with it, is basically taking multi-factor authentication to the next level and applying rules to it about when people should be able to log into things and what rules need to be met in order for them to successfully log in. I believe that it's important, but unfortunately, when it comes to SIM swapping, again, to come back to that, it is a bit of a way around that, because if bad guys holding onto your phone with location awareness, if bad guys holding onto your phone in Vancouver and you suddenly bounce from Toronto to Vancouver, hopefully your system would be able to pick up on that. I think one of the challenges when it comes to these things is that it's always reactive. It's always trying to stay, one step behind the bad guys who are innovative in the ways that they find around these things. So putting all your eggs in one basket is never a good idea, but adaptive multi-factor authentication, or even just moving to multi-factor authentication generally, is a strong step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation. So there was another question here that kind of ties into this. What is the roadmap for a small business to protect themselves? And I think there's a misconception that small businesses don't think they're a target. And, I think all of us here on the panel can tell you otherwise, that small business is actually, in some cases, a bigger target, because it's a crime of opportunity. There's a randomization to it as well. There's obviously some targeting, but also there's the ability for a criminal to basically load up a bunch of addresses in a system and try to see how far they can get into that system on an automated basis. So in a lot of cases, Small business owners just think they're not a target. They don't need to spend the money on security, and then they're the ones who end up having to pay the ransoms, etc., or being caught in that world. So I think from a roadmap perspective, and I'll let you guys fill in your parts as well. From an IT perspective, I think a comprehensive security assessment is necessary to see where you are right now. Do you have locks on your doors? Do you have windows? Because you can't see them. That's the thing. In a physical building, you can drive up to it and be like, "Hey, there's no windows here. What's going on?" But in a data world, you can't see that stuff. Somebody has to show you that there's no windows and doors. So the first thing is to get those windows and doors on, right? Proper security, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, firewalls, patching, on and on it goes. And that can be delivered to you in a risk assessment, a cyber audit, or a cybersecurity audit. Second to that is having an incident response plan, and hopefully we don't have to get the law enforcement involved. So we'll just go straight to Dario and Michael. What do you need to ask your insurance people, in terms of making sure you're properly covered? What would you suggest?
I recommend for small business to get cyber insurance right away. And I say that because we're seeing one thing, customer contracts are now requesting it, whereas before they always wanted that you carry commercial general liability. But I think it's important as a small business to get into the insurance market, cyber insurance marketplace sooner, to establish that track record with the insurance company. You do not want to start looking for cyber insurance after you had a hit. All right, then it's really problematic and challenging. But to get that tenure with an cyber market over a period of time, that when you do have that loss, it's not going to be as damaging as the other scenario where you never had it, you had a loss, and now you're trying to get coverage. So I think it's important that you get into the market early and secure some rudimentary coverage and get that in play, and let that coverage grow with your business model. Grow with your business model, explore it every year to make sure, one, it's still cost effective, and two, the coverage is all embracing and fits your business model, because your business model could change and morph. And if the coverage doesn't stay in sync with it, you could have problematic concerns. So like, technology is so fluid and so moving that you probably have to be more vigilant on that than you would with your property insurance that just goes through a renewal, it gets inflated, whatever. Like it's more easily managed and siloed. So that would be my recommendation for small business. Now,
yeah, I would also jump in. I mean, the importance of establishing track record. If you can appreciate, there are really a handful of underwriters you want to do business with, and having. So if you as the broker, when we can present a scenario to say this client has been on top of their cybersecurity, their needs are getting more complex. Yes, they were small. Now they're becoming more complex. But they've been in this game, and we can show a history of 5 years, 10 years. That conversation is so much different than they suddenly need cyber insurance because their buddy had a claim, or because, even worse, they had a claim. Because the first thing the underwriter will do in that world is they will step back and say, okay, how committed is this client? And their pencil will not be as sharp, believe me, if you're showing up later in the game. But if you establish a track record and you can demonstrate that you're an operator and you're making the investments to protect your business, when you get into the world where you might need more complex needs, those underwriters will start competing for those accounts. Whereas if you just show up when you do need it at that point, they're not going to be falling over themselves to get the accounts in the same way. And so it's really important to build that. Don't just wait and say, well, I'm too small. There's never too early of a time to start establishing yourself in that world.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Here's a great question that's right up with that. Can a cyber insurance company increase your premiums if you've put in a claim?
Mike, I'll let you deal with that.
I get that one a lot. It depends on the market. I'm going to give you a lawyer's answer, which I mean I'm going to bob around both sides of it. But can they increase it? Yes, they can. Will they increase it? It all depends on what the type of loss is and the comfort level they have on the go forward post loss. That if there's any vulnerabilities that were discovered in your IT systems, if they've been remediated, it does say that okay, it was a one-off, and they can understand what's going on and willing to accept the risk. So to answer that question, there's got to be a lot of dialogue and a lot of communication between the broker and the underwriter to get that comfort level to understand what has happened and not have an opportunity just to increase premium. So it all depends on the situation and really the negotiating ability of the broker to properly communicate the situation to contain any costs.
Yeah, one of the challenges, I just want to touch on that. A lot of people, especially in the small, medium-sized business world, they'll think of commercial insurance, or in this case, cyber insurance, like their auto policy. I lost my claims-free discount, or your homeowner's policy, and it does not work that way. There isn't a 10% discount associated with a claim. And now you've had 2 claims, you go to a 0-star the way you would on your auto policy. It is really about the business, and it's about the broker being able to advocate for you and be able to weave that story for the underwriter to build that comfort. Because ultimately, you're asking for that underwriter to sign on a rate sheet for a particular client. And so it's a much more in-depth discussion. So, in any commercial, and we see this as companies grow and they become more complex, very different conversations. Claims happen. We know claims happen. That's why you buy the policy. But it's more about the business itself. What's happening with the business? How do the principals see this stuff? And it's about the underwriters having a comfort level saying, okay, well, I understand the claim happened. That's why we sell the insurance. But I know that certain steps have been taken. I know that they're committed to running a proper, they got their hit. We get it. That's why they buy the product. But the brokering, what we call brokering in our industry around that, becomes the ability for us as the broker to be able to have the conversations with the underwriters to say, this is what happened, this is what we've done, this is the track record. It's a much bigger picture. It's not, I lost my 10% discount or my 20% discount. And a lot of times when you see big increases, they tend to be because there's always a backstory. They tend to be because there was a lack of oversight on the business, because it speaks to the business. The broker was not intimate with the business, did not fully understand, could not communicate the cyber exposure and the changes that happened. They didn't have, organizations like Andre, you and what you do around that to really be able to explain and get into that deep understanding of what happened.
I think nothing is going to be 100%. If the government can be hacked, if Boeing, all these companies that have unlimited resources, be it IT, be it money, be it whatever, it's still going to happen. It's a cat and mouse game. And Sean can tell you that the better the technology gets to prevent an event from happening, the better the criminals get at getting around that, and around it goes. So I think an important piece for small business is, one, understanding that there is going to be an expense. And, I think a lot of people are still stuck in generation 1, which is, I have antivirus. Well, what else do I need, kind of thing, right? And typically we show a slide that shows the evolution of cyber threats, and viruses are in the late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of people are still in that mindset. I got my antivirus, I'm good. The things are changing, they're evolving, so you're going to have to change and evolve with it. And that translation for that is the company's going to have to spend money. And then you're going to have to, kind of like in elementary school and high school where you had that fire alarm happen, twice a year when everybody got out of class. The same kind of idea has to happen with your cybersecurity. You got to run through a fire drill. And, these things, it costs money for the school to pay for the fire department to come and run that simulation. It's the same thing in this world as well, too. And a lot of business owners, they get prickly with me when I start to tell them this kind of stuff, right? But it's like, we're trying to help you. Criminality is going to happen. And there's no good way to explain that. You just have to protect yourself, and protection, unfortunately, is going to cost money and effort to do that. But if you keep up with it, the chances of you getting hacked are reduced quite a bit. And then if you're fully covered by insurance, then I think that the impact is a lot less than it could be, because we've seen incidents where we get calls from prospective clients where they're in the middle of an attack and it's blown through their ability to do anything, and they ask us to come out there and help them, and there's nothing we can do. Their information is lost. They're at the mercy of some random person on a chat that they're negotiating basically to get their information back. And Sean will tell you, negotiating with criminals is probably varied outcome, right? So, but you don't want to be in that position. So I think that's an important piece for everyone to think about in their businesses or in their organizations. Is there any other questions that people have but we're afraid to ask? You can make it anonymous too, I think. Is there anything else that Sean, Michael, Dario, we want to bring to people's attention that may not be talked about?
One thing you touched on, the dealing with the cyber criminals. If you get into an event and it's insured and you have the right insurers lined up, they take that burden off your shoulders. So they have the experts who manage that and have those discussions, right? It's not a case where you're left on your own to do that.
Yeah, that's very important. Exactly. So, once it's been identified that you're in the middle of something like that, you reach out to the insurance company, and we've seen this play out in real life. There's a whole team of people that show up suddenly and help you through that event.
Right, and you have to understand why. I mean, from the insurer's perspective, they're on the same page as you are when it comes to the claim. They want to minimize the loss. I mean, it's their own financial interest to do so, but it's also your interests are aligned there. So they want to minimize what their exposure is, but ultimately that's minimizing the exposure to you. And so they're very much aligned with the next steps. They don't want to allow the pipe to keep pouring water into the building. They want that, they want that sealed up as best they can. And so, that's where we get into, I spoke about the handful of underwriters who are in that world. Look, we get memos from insurance companies all the time who didn't insure a computer 2 years ago, and now they're offering cyber coverage as an endorsement on a property policy. And Michael properly said, you can't mix and match the two. And yes, they offer the coverage, but they don't have any of the expertise behind them at their level to really respond in a robust way to these claims. And so the insurers that actually play in that space, you don't just want an insurer that will give you a price, but you want one that has that robustness, that they can provide that out the gate. And not everyone can, is the honest truth.
Gotcha. Okay, one last thing that I want to ask the panel here. For companies that are dealing with private information, whether it be social security numbers, Visa cards, et cetera, is there a membership data? Is there a requirement to report any kind of data breach to the government from a privacy standpoint? Do you guys, Sean? I think you know that one.
I can chime in and say that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner is the one that oversees those reports. So people should check with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner when they know that data has been exfiltrated or data has been stolen, to see if it triggers a reporting requirement. They will be able to tell you. They don't share that information with police, though. So the Office of the Privacy Commissioner is, as you would expect, very private. So they keep that information in-house. Reporting to the police is a separate thing that I encourage people to do. We don't automatically get information from them, but reporting to them is a legislated requirement if personally identifying information has been taken.
Gotcha. Okay. We've got one other question here. Oh, we already answered that one. Does your insurance company increase if your premiums if you put in a claim? Another question is recommendations for providers for complete network penetration testing, et cetera, et cetera. So Ideological does that type of work. If you're an Ideological client and you want to have another person do the penetration testing, we definitely recommend that. It's always nice to have somebody verify the work that we're doing. So we have a few different companies that we work with, and I'm sure we can get you others if you reach out to me. And there are companies that specialize just in penetration testing and nothing else. So we engage with them to verify all the work that we've been doing, and sometimes to bring them in to just take a look at what's going on at a prospective client's side. So hopefully that answered the question for you. So I think that's about it, unless there's any more questions that we have. I just really want to thank Dario, Michael, and Sean for taking the time to speak with us today to start off Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. We're a little bit early, but I think it's important to get the message out there that this is very real and it is affecting companies on a daily basis. We see it all the time, and I'm sure the gentlemen here on the screen see it in their worlds as well. And if you have any questions for any of us, feel free to reach out. I think Catherine will disseminate out all our email information if you have any specific questions. And is there anything else, Katie, we want to add?
No, if you distribute my information, I'm happy to take questions from anybody generally about cyber stuff at any point. I'm happy to help.
Excellent. That's much appreciated, Sean. And definitely reach out to him. Sean's great to talk to. So I want to thank all of you folks for attending out there. Can't see you, but I see your list of names. So thanks for taking the time out in your afternoon to listen to us, and hopefully you found this helpful.
Just to let everybody know, anyone who is attending and who can attend, there will be a recording of the video sent out to all use tomorrow at 2:00.
Okay. Well, everyone have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the sunshine. And we'll see you again. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.